Welcome back to the Greybeards podcast. We're three old guys with gray beards, and we hope a little bit of wisdom over 150 years combined experience in a lot of different things like national security, war, terrorism, investigative reporting, you name it. Uh, you're going to hear about our experiences and how it relates to what we're seeing around the globe here with big challenges to national security with the current war with Iran. Um, Guys, how you doing? You looking good?
Yeah,
Yeah,
great to
so
see
are
you
you,
again,
buddy.
Mike.
We got Bob Sands, Hall
That's
of
me.
Fame investigative reporter, and Ken Campbell, um, rescuer of tankers. Let me see what else.
Diffuser of
Uh, uh,
explosive devices.
yeah,
Yeah, all around,
intelligence analyst,
all around.
satellite guru, you name it. I think Ken's done just about all of it.
And here as
So,
your primary entertainment value, yes.
yeah. So, did you all see the press conference?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
heard
have to
clips
admit,
of it. I didn't see the whole thing, but Bobby, go ahead, man.
yeah, I watched as much of it as I could tolerate. My patience level and my BS meter is just pegging like crazy as usual. It really was riveting listening to the CIA and the military guy. I forget what his name was. Anyway, their descriptions of what happened and the details of
Kane.
how they made that rescue. Yeah, that was fascinating. I love that. As far as what the president had to say, it's always this disjointed rambling and suddenly we're talking about something different, and then we're talking about that weave. It drives me nuts. Um, all it said to me was, he'll back down again, which is probably a good frickin' thing, because the last thing we need is for this to get any worse than it is. So, what's your take, Ken?
Yeah, well, I thought he was hardcore on that. Of course, they justifiably took their victory lap
Sure, sure.
for the rescue of those pilots, but then we got back into that really harsh rhetoric again. That we're gonna bomb you to hell,
Yeah,
generally speaking. And then, a few hours after that, at kind of like clockwork in previous threats, stuff starts leaking out that, well, we may be close to some sort of diplomatic solution or something's going on for a ceasefire. And which tells me is, we're in a war of words. We're in a real war, but right now, the harshest weapon is what the president's saying, and um, I get. I'm kind of optimistic that there isn't going to be this attack of everything there, just the way it timed out again like that. I don't know, Ken. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the history of the president as a businessman, and then certainly in his role as president, his primary tactic is kind of getting to be self-evident, where he threatens. He threatens lawsuits. He threatens bombings. This, that, and the other. And then uses all of those extreme threats to then pitch a proposition for how we can resolve these things. So on one hand, he's telling Iran, we're going to bomb you back to the Stone Ages. We're going to destroy your electrical grid. We're going to, take out your water supplies. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But, oh, by the way, if y'all will just come to the table and we can discuss this and negotiate a settlement to include opening up the straits, all those bets are off and we can be happy families. I mean, this is his tactic. I think over the weekend, and you, Bobby, and I discussed it. I mean, things were really getting out of hand with the rhetoric, particularly the invoking of God and religion and this sort of thing, and certainly it bled over to comments made by the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. And I think, Mike, you and Bobby are really well versed in the kind of things that are being thrown about with that kind of rhetoric. That's really dangerous.
At least three
And
times
that
today.
definitely worried
At
me.
least
But
three.
Bobby, I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of that, because you know we could talk about what happened today or what didn't happen, but there's still those words there, and the potential intentions behind those.
And they do go straight to the issue of religion. I mean, the president thanked God and praised God at least three times that I heard, probably more. Now, that was in the context of the rescue. You want to give that to a higher power, I'm all for it. No problemo here. But his use of it is always striking me. I can't help but still seeing him standing in front of a church holding a Bible upside down. So, to me, a former Mennonite raised in the most strict religion you can outside of some sort of cult, that throws everything out of whack for me. If it came sincere, I would go for it. But to me, it sounds like he's using that name for justification for anything that happens or doesn't happen. And so that troubles me. But again, hey, if you want to give God praise for the rescue of those wonderful pilots man, I can't imagine what those guys went through. I think that's fine. I got no problem with that. Just
Yeah, and
using the
I
name.
agree. I agree. It's funny because I think you and Mike and I talked about religious extremism, particularly
Yes,
homegrown here in the United States. And one of the things that I threw out, and I think we discussed ad nauseum, was the phrase "men who talk to God with guns are really, really dangerous."
patriots, yes.
You know,
And, a lot of what Christian nationalism espouses is just a heartbeat away. It's so alike, the kind of religion that white supremacists practiced at Elohim City here in Oklahoma. I
yeah,
mean, that Christian Israelism stuff
right,
about
right.
them being the
Identity
lost
Christian,
tribe and all, yeah, identity
the
Christian.
identity Christian movement back in the day.
I mean, it's the same concept, and it it's deeply rooted around the president right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really dangerous. I mean, Mike, back to you.
Well, no, hey, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mike Betcher, by the way, from coming to you from Oklahoma. So we don't have the money for real lower third graphics. So I'm just wearing it there, my location on my chest.
That
It's a
works
cheap
well.
way of doing
It's a
things.
good lower
Hey,
third.
I want to throw something out though. We really, if our cyber warfare capabilities are what we think they are, we don't need to bomb power plants to make that country dark. And if the Iranians have the capability we think they have, and our electrical grid is as vulnerable as I've been told over the decades it is, both sides, could do this without dropping a physical bomb, but using cyber bombs, basically. What do you think about that proposition? That if this happens, this tit for tat, we may enter a cyber warfare stage, which is not something that I'm looking forward to. But I don't know. Thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, well, we've seen, exploratory efforts. There's been a number of hack attacks that have been attributed to Iran, or at least Iranian sympathizers, getting into the systems of medical appliance companies, and messing
Striking
up their entire
situation.
ecosystem. But there's also historic precedent here for Iran to hit infrastructure, and there was a case in which Iranian hackers got into the SCADA system, and I think we talked about this in the first podcast a little bit. That they got into the SCADA system, which is the control system for all the solenoid valves and things that open and close and allow water from the dams to go this way and that. And SCADA systems are also in the electric power grid in terms of turning on and turning off current and this sort of thing, I believe. But I to your point, Mike, I think we've got the capability to darken Iran without having to, quote unquote, bomb them back into the Stone Age.
I love that word, darkening. You remember
Well,
that one well, I'm sure.
yeah, no, that goes back to an old neo-Nazi plan back from the 1980s called Darking the City, and Bobby and I, and with the help of one of your old professors, Ken, back at Naval
John
Postgraduate,
Arquilla.
yeah,
Yeah.
we were able to track down the guy who was a kid in his basement who did
Yeah.
have that
But yes.
capability. He was working on it. And so you've got, a whole Iranian core of uh, cyber warriors, and we've got a ton of them too. And I wonder why that card hasn't been played yet. And that's, you know, that deception could be part of this. Trying to convince the Iranians that this is going to be an attack with missiles and drones and aircraft, when in reality it would be cyber. But we have big vulnerabilities here in this country, and I think
Yeah.
if that happens, we're going to find out how vulnerable we are.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Mike.
Anyway, I want to move to back in history a little bit, to the early mid 1980s. I think 1981 to 1988, the Iran-Iraq war and the tanker war between those two nations, when they fought their war that happened. Just in terms of, the end game here right now, and the immediate right in front of us seems to be, from the White House, the Strait of Hormuz should be opened, and we're going to force it being open. A week ago it was, we're going to leave and let everyone else worry about that. But now we're in the mode of no agreement can be had for a ceasefire or anything else until the Strait of Hormuz is open to shipping from all parties. But in terms of escorts, is the threat, Ken? And I know you were working in that part of the world as Navy EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, during the tanker war. How problematic was it protecting those tankers going in and out, both, because both sides were attacking each other. Actually, Iraq attacked more ships than Iran did. And the Navy deployed. I forgot what year was that, Ken, the Navy deployed. Would that have been 84, I think?
No, well, we didn't start to ramp up our participation until, I want to say, 86, 87. So that operation was called Earnest Will, and at a certain point in the war, because the commercial shipping of principally oil was being gacked up, by the belligerents, both Iran and Iraq, and particularly Iran now was dropping mines into the Gulf, floating mines. They weren't tethered; they were just out there, right? And so they'd float around, and ostensibly a ship would hit them, and quite frankly, a real risk proposition for commercial shipping. And so at that point, the administration stepped in, made a decision that we were going to participate full on. The operation was called Earnest Will, in order to have our Navy escort those ships up through the straits and on up the Persian Gulf to oil terminals and whatnot. The tankers had to be reflagged under a U.S. flag, and so there was an effort through that campaign to convoy vessels and whatnot to get safely up through the Persian Gulf to oil terminals in Ad Dammam on the Saudi Arabian side, and on all the friendly side of the GCC up in Kuwait, and then get back out. And that said, it was not an easy thing to
Right.
accomplish. And it certainly didn't involve a U.S. Navy vessel taking lead. They'd put a tanker out front, very large ship that's got the ability to absorb the detonation of a floating mine and keep on churning versus one of our frigates or destroyers hitting that mine. And that was the beginning of our participation. And of course, it escalated with Iran continuing to toss mines into the Persian Gulf. It really wasn't so much about what Iraq was doing, but Iraq did cause problems. They were shooting at tankers coming out of Karg Island with anti-ship cruise missiles, the Exocet cruise missile, French-made, launched by French-built aircraft that the Iraqis had bought, Super unarmed. A very complex situation, quite frankly, and we got engaged, and it still took a bit of time to get things to settle down, Mike.
The tactic now, do you think it would duplicate that sort of thing? Did that work, having that tanker out front? These aren't floating mines they're using. If they actually laid them, they're different kinds of mines than that. You wrote a report on that for your Beastworks security
Information group
assessment.
report, yeah. So the Iranians have got quite a mine inventory to include floating mines, and then floating mines that are anchored, and then floating mines that are anchored that not only are designed to fire on contact, but also a series that are designed to fire based on sensing noise and pressure and seismic vibrations. Those are called influence mines. Some of them are tethered, within what we call the volume of the ocean depths, and some of them sit on the bottom. And the ones that sit on the bottom, have a huge explosive component to them. And when they detonate, when they sense a vessel and they detonate, they create a lot of gas, and that gas goes up, and as it goes up, the pressure's reduced, and that gas bubble gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the idea is to have that gas bubble right under the ship about the time that it comes over, and the ship just collapses in that bubble and it breaks the back, right? And they've got those kind of,
Wow.
the technology is dated, but they're still very effective. And they have those, and of course there's been reports that mines have been placed in the Straits of Hormuz. And what kind of mines? That's a good question.
So let me go back in history a little bit, because I want to always kind of heard bits and pieces of this story about you and your exploits during that war. Did this actually happen, that there was an Exocet missile that was fired at a tanker? It didn't explode, but was lodged in the tanker, and you had to defuse this, or is that BS? Is that true?
No, Mike, it's totally true, and
I thought so.
there's
Not that I ever doubted it. I want to hear this story, man. I want to hear this story.
yeah, it's an interesting story for sure, and so I had a bomb disposal detachment assigned to the USS Camden, which was an ammunition oiler, that deployed with the USS Constellation Battle Group in 1985. In fact, it was that battle group, the Constellation Battle Group, where the first deployment of F-18 fighters,
Wow. Okay.
were included in the air wing, which is kind of wild, right? I'm dating
Yeah.
myself. I am an old guy. This is why we call it Greybeards, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I had the EOD detachment on the USS Camden, which was an ammunition oiler, very fast for its size and whatnot, and it was built that way so that it could keep up with the carrier, which was about the fastest ship in the battle group, quite frankly. And you needed that logistics ship, the ammunition oiler, because we had the groceries, we had the fuel, we had the bombs, we had the bullets, we had all that. And so if where the carrier went, we would always wind up. So I was assigned to take an a Navy EOD detachment on board the Camden in support of that battle group. Now, in addition to having responsibilities to deal with any problems that might occur with munitions and whatnot on the Camden, we were also the forward deployable detachment. In other words, if there was ordnance crisis in the battle group, or if something happened ashore or whatever, and they needed to surge us, that was our responsibility. Meanwhile, there was another EOD detachment on the carrier, and they were strictly responsible for dealing with flight deck operations where they're flying, live ordnance and whatnot. And but anyway, so my detachment was the deployable detachment, and in May of '85, I can't remember. I think it was the 3rd or the 5th of May. I just finished working out, grabbed some coffee, went down to the message center in the ship to get my morning traffic. And I'd pick this stuff up. It was all teletyped, had funny classification levels on some of it, but that was my morning paper, and I'm thumbing through it, and right out, about the third document I pop up is an operations order for my detachment to prepare to render aid to a Turkish supertanker that had reportedly been hit by a missile that they suspected had dud fired. The warhead had dud fired. It hadn't gone off, but was still in the tanker.
Wonderful.
So I'm like, oh crap, holy, we got a mission. We got to, So I went down to our EOD spaces and met with my senior NCO, chief petty officer, and I had 3 really hot, EOD techs besides the chief, a little more junior, but nevertheless really well trained, really, really motivated guys, and I said, hey man, we got a mission. And they're all like, what? So I sit them down and we go through, what we knew. And then, assignments went out to like, okay, let's review A, B, C, and D and see what information we have, and let's prep the gear and get that all ready. And while the chief is overseeing that, I'm now working on how we're going to get from our vessel, the USS Camden, to this ship in extremis. It was a super tanker called the Burak M. I think it was B-U-R-A-K and then M. That had made it down the straits after being hit and was anchored off of the port of Fujairah up in the Gulf of Oman, very close to the straits.
Wait,
Fujairah's in
wait.
the United Emirates.
So
Go
this
ahead.
tanker's moving down the Gulf with a big Exocet missile stuck in the side.
Yeah,
That must have
the missile.
been a sight to behold. Okay.
Yeah.
No one wanted to be near that tanker, but
probably not. I don't know.
but you did.
Well,
yeah, except for him,
by order of the United States Navy. So,
Okay.
so anyway, we get all this prepped, and I'm working with the ships, with the Camden's commanding officer and the XO and whatnot, and then the battle group commander and his staff, and I requested that we be supported by a specific destroyer that we had already been training with in the battle group, to deal with ordnance crisis and whatnot. And they were already very familiar with us and, sort of kind of how we operated and what kind of gear we'd take. And so, I made a recommendation that this particular destroyer, which was the USS Fletcher, be assigned to work with us. And the battle group commander, who was a I think it was a one-star admiral, whatever. So he wrote the op order and ordered the USS Fletcher to stand by to support us and this sort of thing. Interesting story just in that alone. But anyway, so we got all of our gear prepped, and then we the Camden got in proximity to the Fletcher, at least close enough to where our CH-46 detachment could, airlift us over to the Fletcher. We got over there, got on the vessel. I went and I briefed the CO on all the heretofores on what we were doing. He was kind of pissed because he had been, reportedly, and I don't know if this is true. I'm remembering from, back then, what was said, but he'd actually been shadowing a Soviet fast attack submarine that had been shadowing the battle group, and it's like, now he's going to be a bus driver to take this lieutenant and his EOD guys up into the Gulf of Oman to go deal with this quote unquote garbage problem, So it's kind of funny. But anyway, so we got everything ready, and and they took us up there, and I outlined a plan of action to include enlisting the helicopter detachment that was assigned to the Fletcher. They had 2 anti-submarine warfare helicopters, totally designed for chasing submarines, absolutely not designed for lifting loads or anything. But I talked to the air det to the helo det commander and his guys, and they said, yeah, we think we can sling load some of your gear and get it over to that supertanker in a much more expeditious fashion than doing it by small boat. So we got in proximity to the Burak M, and the EO detachment members and we went over by small boat, and then they, the helicopter detachment slung load, all of our gear. Now you got to remember, this had never been done before. As far as I was told by the helo det commander, there'd never been a sling load of gear underneath one of these SH-2F, submarine warfare helicopters. So that was kind of a first. I mean, they were gung-ho to do it. So they got all that gear over on the ship. We got over there. I talked to the ship's master, the captain. He was retired Turkish Navy, and he told me they'd seen the 2 Iraqi fighters coming down the slot and launching the cruise missile. Actually, I think they launched 2 or something, but one missed, and then the other one, hit the side of the ship just forward of the bridge in one of the, one of the outer oil tanks, and not, there was no detonation. So the ship's master, the captain, he just assumed that they had a live bomb inside their ship. Maybe I should pause here for comments from my colleagues here.
Well, so I have nothing to say right now.
Yeah, I'm just stuck with the image of it.
I think I would have, just handed my lieutenant bars and, said,
yeah,
see
right.
you a little later.
Yeah, it's like,
go take care of this.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm not sure about this one, but
keep going. I think this story is going to get even better.
Yeah, anyway, I debrief him, get us about as much information as I can. Of course, as luck would have it, we really didn't have a lot of information on this particular weapon system, so we had to infer how it probably armed, and then, how the fusing system detonated the warhead, and I think I got a pretty good handle on that, but even so, all we had was a little data sheet that said, this thing is made in Paris, France. You want to sit down with, anyway, so, the ship's crew had rigged a Jacob's ladder over the side of the ship, right, so that they could access the hole made by the missile. Now, that hole was probably about, yay big. It was a pretty good sized hole. And I went over to that Jacob's ladder with one of those old yellow Navy battle lanterns, big shiny thing. And I I put it into the hole, and there's this sheen of oil, this pond that's, I don't know, 50 feet across, 60 foot in length, and 70 feet deep, and it's just kind of like undulating. The sea conditions were very calm. It was 100 degrees temperature, 100% humidity. The sweat's trickling down. And I poked that light right in that hole, and I'm not sure what I expected to see, given the probabilities that, uh, were maybe not in our favor. And that light caught this big old cylindrical thing that was off in one corner of the oil tank, and so I'm looking at it, and I get the light, and it's all white and cylindrical, and it's got these green stripes which are indicative of high explosives. And I'm like, holy crap, that's the warhead. How the hell is it just sticking in the bulkhead on the other side of the oil tank? I said, how lucky is that, right? And so I also had a 35 millimeter camera with me, and I'm snapping away, pictures. Meanwhile, the guys are recording everything that's going on, because we record each step in the process, whether it's doing what we call the long range reconnaissance or the close in look or whatever, so that if the guy on scene gets blown away, they know, what point in the process something got screwed up, right? So, and of course, we didn't have digital cameras back then. It was film. But anyway, so I got pictures of that. Came back up, and I said, hey, guys, that warhead is sitting, like we're standing on the deck, is sitting, about 15 feet that way under that deck plate, right? And then we started to try and figure out, well, okay, how are we going to get at it, given that from what the ship's crew was telling us, the guys that handle the pumps and the transfer system for getting oil out and oil back in, they said, well, we can't backfill with seawater. So, we're talking about, what the hell do we do? And I came up with, a thought, well, let's get one of the rescue rafts from the ship, and we'll put it down there, and we'll just paddle up, right? And of course, part of the team, if you will, was the executive officer of the Fletcher, and he's listening to us. He had a radio, a PRC 77 standard radio for the day, and he was broadcasting information back to the ship. Anyway, he was listening, and he said, hey, we got a John boat over at the Fletcher, we can get that and bring it over here. And I'm like, yeah, let's get that. So the helo crew picks that thing up and brings it over. And meanwhile, we're talking to the deck crew about how to get the plates up. And, there was a access hatch that was bolted down that they were able to pull up. And we put the John boat down in there. And, I went ahead and donned what they call a Scott Air Pack, which is a self-contained breathing apparatus. Same thing that firefighters use, EMTs, whatever, when they go into an environment where you've got toxic smoke and whatnot. So I throw that on. My chief lowers me into the boat. We kind of rigged up a half-assed rappel with a pulley system, and I went into the boat. That was kind of interesting because oil is lighter than water, and it doesn't really buoy up a boat as well as water does, and we hadn't even calculated that one. So as soon as I get in that boat, the boat sinks about up to the gunnels, and there's about that much clearance, just think about sinking in that damn thing, right?
That's
so anyway,
70 feet of oil below you. Right?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
exactly.
You're floating around.
But I'm tethered. I mean, if the boat sinks, I'm just going to get dunked in oil, which God knows what that would do to me long term. I don't know. But we were all gung ho. We were young, and I mean, we could come up with the comments and whatnot. But we were mission oriented, and we wanted to get this thing done. So. anyway, so I get in that boat and I paddle up to the warhead, and I'm about ready to put my hands on the thing and start doing some things, which I can't, really talk about the details here, but the alarm on my Scott air pack goes off, letting me know that I don't have much air left, and it freaked me out, man. I was like, holy fucking shit. Startled me like, if you can imagine, and I almost fell out of the boat. And then, of course, my chief, who's tending me, he's like, Lieutenant, what's going on? What's going on? I'm like, hey, Chief, man, it's okay. I'm just out of air. I got to come back out. So by then I was kind of settled down. I got another Scott air pack or a Scott bottle and, went down. I checked out the warhead. I figured that it was probably safe enough to move as it was, given that it hadn't detonated by the impact of the ship. And, there's some things that I understood that, again, I can't talk about here, but we rigged up kind of a improvised, basket and a line on that basket, and we were able to pull that warhead into this rope basket. And that was a crapshoot because we thought, if that thing doesn't hold, it's going to sink all the way down to the bottom, and then we're going to be screwed, right? But anyway, we got it up out on deck, and then the next step was to figure out how to separate, the fuse, or what we thought was the fuse, from the warhead. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is you got to separate these components. And so we came up with a plan to try and do that involved lashing the warhead down to the deck and then rigging an extraction pulley, and, did some things that, again, I can't go into the details about how we rigged it, but suffice to say we had a line on what we thought was a fuse, and the warhead was lashed down to the deck, and then we stretched that line all the way to the forecastle, which was about a football field or so away, because, if we're going to do this, we want to pull and we want to be remote, because if it goes off, we don't want to be anywhere near that, right? So all 5 of us are on the forecastle and we're honking down on this line, and damned if our pulling doesn't result in an action. And that action was it broke the lashes free, and then all the stretch in that line, like a rubber band, caused the warhead to just, the line, just with all its elasticity, is it just, all that energy, it pulled the lashes free, and that warhead was pulled, in rather a speedy fashion. It was bouncing down the deck, coming towards us, boom, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And we all dived behind this piece of equipment on the forecastle, and then we're all like listening, it's like, and I get the binoculars, and I'm looking down at the warhead, and I turn around to my chief and I said, Chief, I think it's safe. I don't think it's going to blow up, man. I think we're okay.
That's
what an image of a
insane,
bouncing
man.
warhead. Oh my
That's
God.
insane.
Yeah.
I still can't get out of my mind you on a little dinghy floating in oil inside a tanker looking at an Exocet warhead. Had the missile fallen out of the hole? I mean, what happened to the missile itself? It looked like it was not there, just the warhead.
Well,
right?
no, I mean, look, the warhead sits on the front of the rocket motor, and then you have the guidance system in front of that, right?
Yeah.
And so that whole weapon system is radar guided with infrared terminal guidance. So at a certain point, the infrared guidance picks up, and that missile will then home in on the hot spot of the ship, which is the engine room. And when it hits, all those guidance components and whatnot, those get smashed out of the way of this of the warhead, which is, about 100 pounds of explosive, 300-pound total weight, and that other 200 pounds is all metal. And the front of the weapon is actually designed with what they call anti-ricochet lugs. So when it hits and it starts to do this, those lugs straighten it out and keep it driving straight down, right? it the the missile components, including the motor, they kind of disintegrated. Now, we were eventually able to empty the oil tank, and we could see big chunks of rocket motor, inside. So, I mean, that kind of confirmed that, when that missile was launched, they're basically right on top of the supertanker. And quite frankly, I don't think that the warhead had time to arm.
Yeah, sounds
You
like
know,
it. Well,
yeah,
it's a good thing it
So,
was oil and not liquefied natural gas, and not that oil's
Bubba.
anything fun.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm sure that no. Well, I wouldn't have been
man,
called because that ship would have been blown to bits.
yeah, no. Well, all of that to say that it's not going to be easy protecting oil tankers going in and out. That's a lesson learned from this. That's a hell of a story, Ken.
Yeah,
Man, that's
Yeah,
I.
there's one key
crazy.
part
That's
he
a
left out. One key part he did not mention.
oh, what
Oh,
was
Someplace
that?
in there, probably where he couldn't discuss things, there was a pocket knife involved. Okay.
Also used a pocket knife.
yes, there
Really
was.
sophisticated
Yes,
equipment.
there was.
Okay.
High tech, baby.
Thank you for reminding us, Bobby. When I paddled up to the thing, there was a part of the effort where I needed a little blade action, and I had
Okay.
a buck flip block knife, and I used that to do something
Do something that you can't talk about. I got
that I
it.
can't talk
Oh,
about, but I will say that buck knives are wonderful things,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and if this
well,
podcast helps sell a few, I want a cut.
and these exocets, they were lethal weapons because I remember when I was covering the Falklands War and I was down in Argentina. The Argentinians fired an exocet at the at the HMS Sheffield, a destroyer. I guess it was a destroyer, and it just destroyed that ship, caught it on fire. It changed the way ships were built after that, right, Ken? Because it was made out of aluminum, I think was the issue.
Yeah,
Aluminum
and
burns.
that thing just went up, like like a dry Christmas tree, if you will.
Man,
And you know, but yeah, I think you're correct on that. I think there was a revisiting of how ships were constructed and what metals were used, because that aluminum just fed that fire big time.
well, I think we're going to find out here at some point if some agreement to a ceasefire does not come. We're gonna find out about how difficult it is to do this. I'm sure, to protect this tanker traffic going in and out. Do you think this generation of EOD in the Navy that have studied what you did way back then?
Oh, they're so much better than I was, and
Well, I
the
know that.
technology. Well, let me just back up. The technology and the equipment is so much better, and they're trained on it. So EOD techs today are trained on remotely operated vehicles and robotics, and they've got sophisticated diving equipment, all kinds of things that will enable them to conduct their mine countermeasures mission, uh, if and when they're called to action. So
And you only had a pocket knife and a rubber raft.
John boat.
and a John boat, and a couple of days of training. No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's a hell of a story.
Right.
Hey, let's wrap it up and see what comes this week. I mean, I think tomorrow's the deadline, and we'll be keeping an eye on this. But thanks for sharing that story because we joke about it, but man, you got some brass ones, buddy. I mean just being inside a tanker floating on 70 feet of water with
Oil.
excuse me, oil with a warhead just across the way over there. That that would get my attention. But anyway, God bless you, man. I tell you
Absolutely.
what,
Glad
that's a
you're
great
still here,
story.
buddy.
That's a great story. I won't forget that one. Yeah, I'm glad you're still here. Okay, guys. Well,
I'll see you next time.
let's call it quits, and we'll until next time. Let's see what the next chapter of this war brings. It seems like every week there's a new surprise, something's going to happen tomorrow, whether it's good or bad. We're going to find out probably in 24 hours or less. So we'll be back talking to you on the Greybeards podcast. See you later, Bobby. See you,
See
Ken.
you, Matt. Take it easy, guys.
Okay. Hey, don't, yeah.